I want to turn up the little brass bit that holds the throttle cable in the carburettor. Before I can do that, I need to fix my lathe. My new cross slide for my lathe didn't come with these two tapped holes where the actual handle thrust bearing unit fits on the end of the screw. I'm going to take some measurements off the original one here and transfer those measurements to the new one and drill and tap those two holes. So there's two new tapped holes in this casting, M6. I found some new screws. The original ones are bent. I don't know how they got bent, but it must have been involved with the crash. They screw in there nicely. So there's two new screws holding that thrust block onto the new casting. It lined up nicely. It's got a little bit of play in it when it's loose, so that will help in getting final alignment once the thread's into the brass nut. This is just to show the fixturing the old angle block I made. These are a couple of holes that were in the angle block to try and get the short distance across from there, and used a block there with a couple of little blocks on it to hold the casting in place. Same on the other side, but that worked very effectively. I've got my compound slide back together, reconstructed with new castings. Took a couple of days because most of the trouble involved getting the gib right on it, gluing it up and grinding it back to a thickness that needed to lose about 0.5 millimetre all the way along, which was no easy task. Reasonably happy that it's together. I've cleaned up a couple of things, not much. It seems to be working okay. For those that didn't see the original drama with this, compound slide is broken, cracked through there and cracked down there, through there, after a big smack. One of the things I noticed when I first pulled down the Koorlong green bike, this brass fitting here, which holds the end of the throttle cable into the butterfly mechanism here, was missing, and I intend to make a new one. First thing I'm going to do is remove this one from my 1990 bike, get measurements from it. So there's a bit of a drawing I've made of this little brass throttle cable retainer, I call it, for the Mikuni Carby. I love the metric system because this little component seems to be all integer values, 7 millimetres, 6 millimetres, 8 millimetres, 6 millimetres. The hole where the end of the lead on the end of the cable fits is 3.3 millimetres, as close as I can measure it with a drill bit. That's close to 1/8 of a banana. It's 4 millimetres deep, the hole, so it goes more than halfway through the 6 millimetre diameter. The slot in the component, a 1.5 millimetre drill fits neatly in that slot, so that's how I got an idea of the dimension of the slot. Anyway, if that's of any use to anybody who has to make one of these, I'm going to make a few of them out of an old tap handle that's brass. I haven't actually measured the diameter of that, but I think it's probably 8 millimetres, and I may be able to get a few of them out of that length. I will be drilling the holes in the samples I'm making first, and then parting them off in the lathe that I repaired yesterday. I've got this far with cable retainer. The slot I've cut with a hacksaw is not wide enough, so I'm going to try and open it up with an abrasive cut-off disc, which is fractionally wider. I ran a 1.5mm drill right through. That's the 3.3mm drill drilled in 4mm deep. Once I've opened that slot wider, I can part that piece off and it's done. This is how I'm set up to drill the hole 3mm in from the end and centre drill. I then follow it through with a 1.5mm drill right through, and then a 3.3mm drill down 4mm. Well, the first one of these took probably an hour setting it up and frigging around and working out how to do it. This one's taken like 10 minutes. It's turned out better. It just needs parting off now. I'm not going to make any more. I'm sick of it. Well, there's the two new parts I've made. I just did a comparison on the end of that throttle cable, and the slots in mine are both still a fraction narrow. You can see that against the original. They're pretty dimensionally accurate. Will certainly do the job. Well, it might have taken me 3 hours to make this 10-cent part, but you get a certain amount of satisfaction when it just works. That's the end of, well, it's a choke cable I've got here on the table, but you know, that just disappears in the end of the little retainer. Work the same way when it's installed in there. A job well done. I've used a lathe and a milling machine to do that, and they're tiny parts. You can make small parts on big machines, but you can't make big parts on small machines. My lathe and mill have proven very beneficial for making bits and pieces for my hobbies. I didn't have any screws for this black Makuni cover, so I found some cheap ones that the heads look big and they've got the cross on them, not just Phillips head. And I found some small split washers and some larger washers. Looks a bit different to that bolt there, which has a split washer and an ordinary washer and just a JIS head. I've added that throttle cable retainer to my carburettor spares kit here. There's two old float valves in here. There was two needles for those float valves, and this carburettor was missing the needle altogether. If you look at a previous video, you'd see that. So I grabbed the needle, the better looking one, out of this old kit and fitted it up, and I've blown through the tube there, and the floats seem to be holding pressure. It'll do long enough for me to test that engine, and I've got another carby kit like this coming, which I'll put the new needle body and new valve needle in to this carburettor and put the new gasket on it, because I'm still just running the old float bowl gasket there. I think this might be now ready to mock up on the engine. I've been killing time waiting for a timing chain to come. It took 2 days to fix the lathe and half a day to fix the carby. I think the timing chain will arrive tomorrow. Get out to your shed and have some fun.